You're at the Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub, where we enjoy conversations with people who are engaged in the world of coaching.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Coaching Inn, which I think is going to be bump along because we've got lots to talk about. Just a reminder to subscribe or follow if you don't do that already, and check out Inside the Coaching Inn on Substack if you want to see some behind the scenes writing and things. Today, my guest has come to talk about everything you need to know to build a high value coaching business with actual numbers. I've known Gary for a few years now, and we're also neighbours and go walking together. So some of this has been created in conversation walking on the hills with the dogs, hasn't it?
Exactly. More people should come.
And in conversation with you, Gary, and also following Andrew Richards on LinkedIn, who was on the podcast at the end of season 4, one of the things I like about both of you is quite how honest you are about real facts and not just vague things, because there is something, isn't there, in the coaching industry about this is top secret. I'm not going to tell you details about my fees, my anything. And actually that makes it really hard, doesn't it, for our listeners to have any idea where they fit in anything. So before we dive into the wheres and hows and whats, tell us a little bit about your journey into coaching, Gary.
Well, Claire, thanks so much for having me back. It's always a delight to come and join you on the Coaching Inn. And my first experience on the Coaching Inn was one of the many participants in that round table actually talking about the early stages of business building, and that inspired me to talk to you about coming and having this conversation. So, I mean, prior to coaching, I had an eclectic career path, still do. Trained in medicine, but never practiced. Spent 10 years in strategy consulting. Took a career pivot in my late 30s to move into retail, worked for Mothercare and for Selfridges Group as group strategy director, and then on their executive teams. And then in the pandemic, actually, I'd begun my journey of untrained but optimistic coaching in 2019. And in 2020, I decided to give it a go properly. Went to Henley, did my PCEC at Henley, did my Gallup strengths coach training as well in early 2021. Got my ACC in late 2021. And since then, I would describe my primary focus has always been to build the coaching business, which I'm doing. And then alongside it, I always have other stuff going on. So I'm a board member of a couple of organizations in the Rombear world, the Rombear dance world. And I'm currently working 3 to 4 days a week as an advisor to the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, where I'm advising their senior leadership on organizational change and leadership, but not coaching, interestingly. And I think that's quite relevant for the conversation we're going to have about how do you have a high value coaching business that could be a full-time thing or could be something alongside other things that you do.
Yeah. And everybody's business is different.
Right.
And everybody has a different view of the kinds of people they want to coach. So your view is one view.
Right.
And we had Mark Bixter on a few months ago, and his preferred audience and therefore the fees he charges are very different from yours. And it's an absolute delight to hear one view today, which is your view.
Right. And
so what's your go on.
I think it's a really important point that what I'm going to talk about is only my experience, and it's not I think other people should do it, but I think that if you're wondering what other people do charge, it's a point of view. And if you're wondering how you could charge more than you currently do or build more revenue to build a more sustainable business, it's a point of view. There's many different ways to do it.
Yeah. So what's your definition of success, Gary?
Well, it's a really interesting question. My definition of success is more about lifestyle and freedom. So there's a big underpinning thing for me about freedom. I realized quite recently that a lot of my career pivots along the way have been driven by the option that helped me feel more free to make my own choices, not necessarily the most lucrative path to take. Sometimes, it was a lucrative path to take, but that wasn't why I was doing it. And why today I have a diverse and eclectic portfolio career is because I love all parts of it. And if there's a part of it that I don't love, then I try and stop doing it. Sometimes I have to make compromises, and we made a huge compromise last year in terms of our cost base, because in order to have the freedom to be doing the kind of work I wanted to do, that wasn't going to bring in as much money as what it was costing us to live where we lived. And so we explicitly decided to move from St Albans out to here in the Malvern Hills. And I've talked quite a bit about this idea of halve your costs to double your freedom. And so when I'm talking to people about building their business, knowing what success is and knowing what you're compromised to get it is really important. For me, we compromised proximity to London to have the freedom to do the work we wanted to do.
Yeah. And who wouldn't want to live in the Malvern Hills?
Exactly.
As well.
And come walk in with all the coaches.
Exactly. So how do you think about who your customer is?
Well, the reason that I think about this question a lot is because a lot of people think one way about who their customer is, and they will say, I think my customer is people in marketing because I've been in marketing, or they'll say it's people in retail because I've worked in retail. So they think about role or they think about sector. Sometimes you hear people saying, my audience might be people returning to work after having a baby, or it might be people who are neurodiverse. So they start to think different lenses on people. When I started in coaching, I didn't particularly have a mission. I liked the freedom, so I didn't like putting myself in a box and saying, I am the person to coach senior retail leaders, for example. I did coach some senior retail leaders, but I also coached an actor, and I also coached a dancer, and I also coached somebody in consulting, like a variety of people. And then I started to think about who are the people that I really love working with. And that, I think, is a really important thing to think about. Who are the people who, if you could only coach those people, who would that be? And I realized that the people I really like to work with were people who I figured out my description was people with extraordinary goals. So when people say, who do you like to work with? I go, I like to work with people with extraordinary goals. Some of those people, the extraordinary goal might be, I want to be the best in the world at what I do. And sometimes when people look at places I've worked or people that I work with, they see those people. But sometimes somebody with an extraordinary goal could be the person who's trying to get promoted and their boss isn't really sure they could make it. And I think that's an extraordinary goal. So I work less with people who are going on a generic journey and more people who are trying to break the mold in one way or prove somebody else wrong or aim to beat their own expectations, something like that. There's something in there. And my secret double life in the past as a professional ballroom dancer is kind of a bit in that. I spend a lot of time in the dance world, being around people, trying to become really the very best in the world at what they do. And there's something for me that I just think there's something so exciting about people who have that level of ambition, even if they don't have the talent and the skills quite to get there, but they want it. And it's that drive. So yeah, I think when you think about who your customer is, don't just think about a sector or a role or a function. Think about who the people are. Think about what kind of personality they have, the people that really tune into you, and you just go, that was not like work at all. I just loved spending time with those people. And I do think that if your work becomes like that, then it's going to grow because you're going to love it. And if you love it, you'll probably be good at it and you'll probably find more of it to do.
And what I love about the way you said that was that those people know who they are.
Right.
Don't they? They go, oh, yeah, that's me.
I think that's right. How would you describe it, Claire?
What?
Who your customer is?
Who my customer is. Now, my customers are coaches who want to do less.
Right.
And And that means less in lots of ways.
And
Less
I
work,
think
less
that
hours.
if you read what a lot of early stage coaches are busy doing, they're busy trying to write a description of what they do, and they will write some version of, and it's always correct, but also slightly undifferentiated. They'll say, I love to coach. I've trained in Henley or Animas or Barefoot or wherever I've trained. I work with people and I create space, and I encourage them to think for themselves and take ownership. And you're describing yourself. And it's true and it's lovely. And if you read 100 of them, you realize that they all say exactly the same thing. And so if you think of the customer, well, how would they know to come to you? If you say, think of me when, ... think of me when you've got somebody in your team who is super intelligent, but they struggle to integrate with everyone else. Think of me when you've got somebody who should be promoted in the next 2 years, but needs some support to get there. Think of me when you've got somebody who's got something significant going on outside of work, and it's making it difficult for them to also achieve in work. And then think of, well, why should it be you? So I have this little thing that I say to people when I'm helping them to think about who their customer is. I say, what is the question to which the answer is you?
Nice.
And when you can answer that question, so mine might be, you've got somebody with extraordinary goals and you want them to be surrounded by people that will grow them. Think of me and some other people that you will want to put around that person. If you've got somebody who's returning to work from pregnancy and struggling with the integration, don't think of me. I'm not the right coach. Could I coach that person? Yes. Would I be good? Hopefully. Am I the right coach for that person? No. There's many other better coaches. So it turns you from, I kind of can coach anybody, but it's not quite clear who it should be, to, it doesn't mean everybody I work with is in that bucket, but I can start to really focus in and be clean and clear on who I am. And I noticed, Claire, when you said it, coaches who want to do less. If you're listening, notice how few words we use to describe it. People with extraordinary goals, coaches who want to do less. And ultimately, when you talk about who your customer is, you might talk about what your vision is for your coaching practice. The definition of a great vision is something that enables you to allocate scarce resources really effectively. So if you say, for example, your example, Claire, coaches who want to do less, your scarce resource is you. You could work with coaches or anybody else, and you're saying, well, if I had the choice of two people, one's a coach, I'm going to work with the coach. If it's a coach who wants to work 7 days a week and 12 hours a day, or there's another one who wants to work less, I want to work with the one that wants to work less. So your vision, your clarity for your customers is helping you to make choices between what you do and what you don't do. Mine, to work with people with extraordinary goals, it helps me to go, well, what kind of things should I post if I'm going to post on LinkedIn? And what kind of things should I not bother posting? If you say, I like to work with people who are stuck, it's kind of everybody, or most people. If I go, I want to work with people who are looking to grow, again, true, but it's kind of everybody. So getting really focused on what that looks like, who that customer is rather than what you give, is super powerful. And I think is a real foundation for building a successful business.
And it reminds me, in a way I've not thought about before, of the podcast I did with Ginny Carter, the ghostwriter, at the end of season 4.
Right.
Because she was talking about writing a book. And she said, if you think about writing a book as an upside down triangle, no, a triangle, I think she said a triangle. So the bottom bit is a book that anyone could write because your stuff isn't very unique.
Right.
The middle bit, the layer, and she said, don't write that book. The layer above it, it says that your take is slightly different on some common stuff. So you can write that book. But what she says is the most useful and the best book to write is the one that's the top of the triangle, which is something that you do and no one else does.
Right. And when you have that imaginary book title for the imaginary book that you plan to write at some point in your coaching career, and imagine that your audience could just read the title and know something about you. You know, two of your books, Claire, are Simplifying Coaching and The Human Behind the Coach.
Yeah.
And I could go, you know, the books are also great to read, but read the titles. And they already know something about you. You know, I love Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I often wave it in front of the camera for people and say, you may also get benefit from reading this book, but remember the title. You know, and there's something in that, because, you know, when people go, I don't know, Unlocking Leadership, so anybody could write that book. Yeah. And if they could, then it's not clear enough who you are. And you're always going to struggle unless you have a remarkable breakthrough moment, like you're on BBC News, or you do a TED talk that goes viral, or something like that, or you're independently famous, or you work in a high profile role in a famous business. You know, then you can manage with that. But most people are not that, and therefore they have to find a way to cut through. And if you're wondering why you're not cutting through, it's probably because you're not clear enough on what makes you distinctive. In strategy, there's this little phrase which I really like and I repeat all the time, that if you're trying to scale a business, you want to be simple, scalable, repeatable, defensible. So simple, you should be able to explain it in a sentence. Scalable, what you're doing should be somehow something that you can do a lot of without too much variation. So, for example, you know, if you're sitting in your studio at home and coaching on Zoom, you can do 4 sessions of coaching pretty much as easily as you can do 1. So that's scalable. But if you're having to travel all over the country for each session, at some point that becomes not scalable. And so I think for a lot of coaches pre-pandemic, ultimately that was a bit of a limitation on the scale of the business. Repeatable, whether you're doing one-to-one coaching, groups coaching, you know, if you're doing group coaching or you're doing workshops, try and do a workshop that you can do again for a different client, and you can reuse some of that content, then it's repeatable. And defensible, if somebody else could just show up and do the same thing as you, it's not defensible. But as you start to build a personal brand, as you start to build an online community like you have, Claire, with Patreon, it starts to become defensible. I can't come and reproduce what 3D coaching and what you have. You know, I can't do that, because you've got a podcast audience, you've got a Patreon community, you've got coaches walking, and all of that. So simple, scalable, repeatable, defensible is actually a really helpful mantra for the foundations of something that can become bigger, however you do it, whatever your audience is.
And that's all about how do we stand out, isn't it?
Right.
In the reams of stuff that makes it feel like everyone's a coach and there's a lot of competition in the market. Be different, is what you're saying.
I think so, because in reality, when it comes to it, when it's the right client for you, there's only one coach they could possibly work with, and that's you. So you don't have to find all the clients. You've got to find a very small number. And here's the reality. Right now, give or take, if you add up all of the ICF accredited coaches and all the other accredited coaches, there's probably around about 100,000 coaches in the world, something like that, of trained and accredited coaches. Each of them has probably on average got, let's say, 5 clients at any one time. So at any one time, there's 500,000 people in the world who are working with an accredited executive coach. How many people in the world are there who could work with an executive coach? And I'm saying executive coach, but any kind of coach really. You know, millions, tens of millions, possibly globally, hundreds of millions of people. And most of them aren't. So it feels, when you look on LinkedIn, because we're coaches, you see all the coach feeds, that everyone's a coach. But in reality, there are maybe 1% of the number of coaches we really need to serve the needs of all the people who could benefit from coaching. So don't get stuck on there's a lot of other coaches out there, because in reality, there's an awful lot more clients who need support.
And that says Be wise about where you move and who you're connected to.
Right.
And be connected to and move with people in your target market.
Exactly right. And again, don't think about your target market just through the lens of industry or sector or role. Think of it in terms of type of person, community, all sorts of different ways of thinking about it.
Nice. So how long has it taken you to build a sustainable business, Gary?
Depends on your definition of sustainable. And again, that's going to vary by different people. And I don't know other people's circumstances. I was fueled in the early days by the fact that in our household, I've tended to be the major breadwinner. So if I wanted to only do coaching, then I did have I need to earn a certain amount to pay the bills at the end of the month. And we absolutely had times in the last few years where that's been very stretched. For some people, they might not be in that situation. Therefore, their definition of sustainable is different. So what I'll describe is my experience, and it's only mine. I started coaching at the beginning of 2019 when I left one of my retail roles, and I didn't have any training. I hadn't at that point really thought about getting training. I'd always done this kind of informal check-in with people, mentoring / coaching, something like that. Didn't really understand the rules of coaching and all of that kind of stuff. And so at that early stage, when I started at the beginning of 2019, I literally went, I think I want to turn these free conversations into paid conversations, but I have no experience in coaching. I don't know what market rates are. I don't know whether I'm any good. So what should I charge? And right at the beginning, I went, well, I'm working with people. My first coaching clients were people I'd known for years, actually. And one of them, an actor, had no money, so I did it for free. Somebody else had been in my team probably 15 years before, and I think I charged her like £60 or something. And my justification for £60 was if she was doing personal training or having a music lesson or something like that. People pay around that amount of money. So I thought that's kind of reasonable if I think I could add that much value. 18 months later, and I didn't do many hours, 18 months later, in total, I'd made less than £1,000. Luckily, I didn't look at that number. If I had, I might not have left my job and decided to start coaching, more formally. But what I got in that first 18 months was, I love it, and I think there's something in it, and I feel like this could go somewhere. Actually, the numbers did not justify that, but I plowed on regardless. So 2021 was when I started to scale up a bit. I started doing my Henley training, and I spoke to quite an experienced coach who gave me some really good advice. And she said, charge market rate. And I went, but I'm not very experienced, and I'm partway through my training. And she said, no, but if they choose you over another coach, then you're good enough to do the coaching. And I went, oh, that's interesting. And I've given that advice to people time and time again. If they choose you, and they probably won't because you're early stage, because you're partway through your training. But if they do, you should charge market rate. So I started charging market rate, what I thought was market rate. In my first year, so in 2021, I did in total 175 hours of coaching. Some of that was for free. Some of it was paid. Probably 2/3 of it was paid something. My average hourly rate across 175 hours was £246. So I made, in 2021, £43,000 in coaching.
Yeah.
So that was the most hours I ever did per year in coaching, was 175. But my average was 246. In 2022, I was doing other things alongside the coaching. So I only did 100 hours of coaching. But because I was doing more paid at that stage, starting to do the odd piece of corporate where I was charging a higher rate than for private coaching clients. And I was starting to work with people who are a bit more senior, and we'll come back and talk about sliding scales. My average hourly rate moved from 246 to 395. So I did 100 hours at 395. So I generated about the same revenue, but I was working a lot less. In 2023, I moved a bit further forward, so I did 125 hours of coaching. I averaged £440 an hour, so generated 55,000 in 2024. So in 2024, I've been at it professionally in speech marks, for about 3 years. And I did start to have a number of clients who were senior and corporate, and then the rates go higher. So my average in 2024, I did 109 hours in the year, so not a lot of hours, but my average per hour was 779. So some was for free, some was low rates, some was higher rates. So I generated 85,000. And then this year, we're partway through the year, but if I forecast out across the year, then I'll do a bit more. So I'll do about 130 hours, average of 800 an hour, and that'll generate about 100,000. Now, and I'm doing that on 2.5 hours a week of coaching. So there's a key thing that we've talked about before, which is I receive every week multiple emails coming in from people going, hey, we haven't connected, but I've been in business 2 years, and of any kind of business 2 years, so about 24 years old, and they say, come to my weekend retreat, pay me £20,000 and I will give you the secrets of a 5-figure a month or a 6-figure a month coaching business. And of course, they're not coaches, they're not business builders, they're not strategists, they don't know how to do that. But they make a lot of money because a lot of people get seduced by that. And one of the things that I really want to do is to help share. None of it is rocket science. It's just the basics of thinking about, a bit strategically, about how you build your business. And the reason I'm sharing the numbers is because, not to say, I think I'm really successful, because actually there's loads of coaches out there who are much, much more successful than me and charging much, much higher rates. But I think that this is the reason that this curve has happened is because I've been thoughtful and intentional about the business I'm trying to build, which for me is a low volume, high value business. I could have chosen to do a high volume, low value business. I could have focused on workshops and training. I could have focused on group coaching. I could have focused on all sorts of different things. I focused on this, and that's where it's come to. So I'm now coming into year 4, partway through year 4, and now I'm at that sort of stage for about 100,000.
And you have a history and a biography that is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And you have monetizable credibility.
I think that's true. I think that, and that is undoubtedly helpful. Is it possible to coach the people that I coach without that? Yes. Is it possible to open the doors? Yes. Is it a bit more difficult? Probably. But I have to say, I think when I look at the high value people that I work with today, as in the clients that are paying the higher value rates, very few of them are coming through my personal network. Almost all of them are coming because they've known me as a coach. So in that 4-year period, I've worked hard to talk about coaching, to build a brand around coaching, a little personal brand. I don't have a big personal brand. I don't have a big following. But people now see me as a coach. When I first started out, people saw me as a strategist because that's how they knew me. And they would come to me for change and transformation and organization design, or whatever it was, or war and dancing. And so what I couldn't be then was credible as a coach. And actually, some people in the early years said, but Gary, how are you going to do this? Because you're really good at coming with the answer. And so a thing that I did early on, quite intentionally, because I saw that people were not seeing me as a coach and therefore not employing me as a coach, or recommending me as a coach. There's a thing called Forbes Coaches Council, which I was a member of for a couple of years, and it's a pay-to-play thing. So they need you to have 3 years of experience of being in business, doing what you do. And they need your work to have some resonance to the US market. So you need to probably have either one or two US clients, or you've written articles that have been picked up in the US or something like that, because they're mainly a US organization. And it costs something like $2,000 to $2,500 per year to be a part of it. That's a lot of money. And when I did it, it was kind of all the spare money that I had. If you do it, it enables you to do two things. It enables you to be a part of these group posts where they will go, we're talking about people who are becoming C-suite leaders for the first time, or we're talking about people overcoming trauma in the workplace, or people coming back to work after pregnancy. And then they'll say, if you've got 100 words of a thought on that, post it here. If we like it, we'll include it in the article. So each time they publish an article, about 15 coaches who are members get their little snippet posted. And then you can say, I'm part of Forbes Coaches Council. I've been published on the Forbes website. You can also, through Forbes Coaches Council, do up to 10 what are called bylined articles. So your own article, which you submit, their editors will read it and they'll either go, this is rubbish, or boring, we're rejecting it, or they'll help you edit it and turn it into a good article. And I published 3 or 4 articles. They didn't get a lot of coverage. They haven't built me any kind of profile, but a number of those people who knew me over the years as a something else, as a strategist in my case, suddenly went, oh, well, you're associated with Forbes. Oh, tell me more about this coaching thing. Yeah. And it was just the cue that helped people to see me differently. And often people are coming into coaching from a different place, or they do two things. And so the thing that I learned from that was sometimes you just need to give people a little hook to help them to come on the journey with you in coaching. And then they will say, come to Gary for coaching, as opposed to come to Gary for strategy or whatever the other thing is that you're known for doing.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because there are so many paid for awards.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't a paid for award. That was a paid for connection that you shared. And I think that's really interesting, because actually the paid for awards are now 2 a penny.
Right. And I think that there is something about Forbes where, they are selling their brand in this way for people who are coaches. They have a technology council, they have a leadership council, they've got all sorts of different ones. And rightly or wrongly, for the audience, it just helped them go on that journey that I couldn't do before. I did it for a couple of years and then I went, it's probably had the value it needed for me. I don't have the time to be writing articles all the time, so I'm going to say no for now. I might come back to it later.
Yeah.
There's another thing that I did. There's a group called Lightbulb, which is a paid Facebook group, and it's paid £6 a month, something like that. So tiny amount. It's a closed Facebook group of journalists and people with a thing to say. So there's about, I'm going to say 3,000 to 5,000 members, something like that, of whom 2,000 are probably journalists. So a journalist will come on and they'll say, on This Morning Tomorrow, we're talking about this topic. Has anybody had this experience? And it could be anything. And there'll be somebody in the community who'll go, yeah, I've got multiple sclerosis, or my child got thrown out of school, or I've got twin dogs, or whatever the thing is. And occasionally they'll say, we're writing an article in Stylist magazine about, how to give better feedback in the workplace. And all the coaches will come forward. And the ones that respond in the first 20 minutes might get picked up. Yeah. So through Lightbulb, I had an article about my stuff in the Daily Telegraph, in the Sunday Times, in the Metro, in Stylist a couple of times. And weirdly, I was on Talk TV, which is a little bit like GB News. Luckily, never recorded for posterity. I'm happy about that. But again, building that social proof, if that's the way you want to go, there are specific ways of doing that. Before I went on this journey, what I didn't know is there's a route to doing these things if you want to do these things. And often, like you were saying at the beginning, people don't always talk about it. So I wanted to say to people, if you want to be one of those people who gets featured in Stylist magazine when they quote some coaches, the way you do that is you sign up to Lightbulb for £6 a month, and then you sit on the Facebook group, and when that journalist comes forward and says, I'm doing that article, you go, here's a couple of bullet points, and they go, perfect, I'll put you in, and you'll be in the next day. So there's ways and means.
Thank you. Such useful tips and tricks, really.
And it shouldn't be a secret. But
No.
in the coaching industry, sometimes it is. And that's a shame for me, because I see a lot of coaches, we talk a lot about this, a lot of coaches who are worrying about whether they're doing the right thing. And often the worry comes from they imagine that the right thing is one thing, but in fact it's not as complicated as that. But no one's going to talk about it.
But what you've described in the last few minutes is being out there in places that matter, and can be useful, and have strategic reasons behind them.
And I'd add to that, choosing not to be in some places where it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
So in my early days, I post on Facebook, I post on Instagram, I post on Twitter, I post on LinkedIn, and I've stopped posting or even logging into Facebook now. I stopped posting on Twitter, stopped posting on Instagram, because there's no value in it. So my client is not there. Yeah. I post on LinkedIn and I post on TikTok because it's fun, and I don't know anybody there, so I can try things out, and kind of nothing can go wrong. So that's kind of why I play around on TikTok. And also TikTok broadcasts to people that don't know you, whereas most of the other platforms are talking to people that you're already connected with. Yeah. So if you don't have much of a following and you want to have fun talking to people that don't know you, just to try ideas out, then TikTok's quite an interesting place to look, actually.
Nice. So Gary, lots of coaches go and do associate work because there's great benefit in associate work, isn't there? Because you don't have to get the work and you take home less of the money. What are your thoughts about associate relationships?
I think it's great. And it can also be challenging. So it's great for an early stage coach to get experience. And it's great for a coach to get exposure to clients that they wouldn't get exposure to. Yeah. So, for example, an organization I've been working with recently has just signed up with Ezra to coach hundreds of their senior leaders. And somebody like an Ezra can provide that. And there are a handful of individual coaches who also work with this organization, but most coaches would never have access to working with this kind of organization if not through an associate model. The thing that makes me nervous about the associate model is that the price point for the coach is so low. Yeah. And that is just the business model. I get it. And it's a marketplace out there. But if you think about, the numbers I shared, in my first year when I was partway through my Henley training and I didn't have my ACC, my average rate that I was earning, including the pro bono, my average was 246, and the following year it was 395. A lot of associate models, you might be earning, I mean, I don't know the latest numbers, but 60, 80, 100 pounds an hour, something of that order. So again, good for the experience, good for the exposure, good for the practice. Sometimes I think associate models can build a bit of imposter syndrome in the coach, where they start to think that part of the reason that they're getting coaching is not because of them. And something about being independent is, whether you're any good because coaches come back or not. The other thing that is challenging with the associate model is that if you're successful in it, then it can make you very busy. And you have to be busy if you're going to make significant money. So if you're earning £60 an hour and you're doing 5 hours a day, which is a lot of coaching, you're very tired doing 5 hours a day, you're making £300 a day, you're making £1,500 a week. So, you could be making £75,000 to £80,000 a year, but you're almost working full time to do that.
Yeah.
Equally, if you're running your own coaching practice and we're on the trajectory that I've described before, maybe you could do that with an hour a day or a couple of hours a week, something like that. And with the rest of your time, you're developing yourself, you're growing yourself, you're building your business, you're networking, and all those things. And I think if you've done 5 hours a day, you're not going from there and going and meeting potential new clients. And if you do, when you show up, you're exhausted. So there's just that balance of, I think that if your objective is to build a higher value practice over time, associate can only take you so far. And at some point, it needs to either be a part of the whole, or you need to move away from it. The challenge for the associate businesses is how do they retain really high quality coaches at that price point?
Because it goes onto your biography, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, I look back, some of the most senior people I've ever coached have come through an associate model, one or two people. And my associate model, so I'm not an associate for an Ezra or a Coach Hub or one of those. I'm associates within a couple of the global headhunting firms, which is different because the price point is different. They're not paying £60 a coach. So I do think that it's good to have those relationships. And I would say, maybe that's a little segue into what's the size of the pipeline that you need to build your business. In my early years in coaching, I was being quite successful. And I think that does play back to what you said, that I do have an established network. I did have an established profile, not in coaching, but a good profile. I wasn't talking to enough people to build something. And at some point I need to be talking to more people, because if I'm only having conversations with 20 different people, maybe within the 20, only 3 of them is a conversation that's really going to potentially convert into anything. And again, we've talked before, the average time, I think, from going from an initial conversation with a company to doing a piece of paid coaching work with one of their employees is maybe 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah.
You think it might be 3 months. And at the beginning, in the first conversation, it feels like it could be 3 months. And it very rarely is.
Yeah.
I've got multiple relationships I have now that took, 18 months to 2.5 years to start to become, they call me from time to time and send me another client they'd like me to work with. So I built a spreadsheet and I started to track, and I said, okay, this organization, this is who I'm talking to. This is the first conversation I had. This is the next steps. This is the second conversation I've had. This is the next step. This is the third conversation I've had. I got to 55 live conversations. So 55 different streams of conversation with different organizations or private individuals. I just capture it all. And then I had a little key on the spreadsheet. So it was like, green, this is positive and moving forward into something. Red, I kind of think this is dead. Grey it out, it's gone cold. Amber, could be interesting. Maybe I should keep prompting. And about 55, and I was spending quite a lot of time doing this, I started to drop the ball. And there was a particular person where they emailed me one day and they said, are we still meeting tomorrow? And I realized that I'd blanked it. I should have sent a reply. I hadn't sent a reply. And that was the moment when I went, I need to get myself some help. And I was at that stage in my growth where, I was doing okay, but I wasn't making a lot of money and I didn't have piles of free cash sitting around the place. Had I done so, I might have gone, I can just get some help. It's easy. It wasn't. So I looked at getting a virtual assistant. And typically when you start to work with a virtual assistant, the minimum number of hours they'll do with you in a month is about 10. You might find somebody who'll do 5, but typically it's about 10. Typically a virtual assistant is going to charge you somewhere around 25 to 35 pounds, something in that kind of range. So the sort of entry price point is, can you afford something like 250 to 300 pounds a month to pay somebody who's going to connect in on your email and help you with stuff? So I signed up. There's a big agency called Time Etc. That's why I started, timeetc.co.uk, and they've got a network of 20,000 virtual assistants. And you say, this is me, and then they send you within about 24 hours. We think this is the person you should start working with. If it doesn't work out, come back and we'll send you a different person. They connected me with a really great assistant. And I felt really bad because I had 6,000 emails in my inbox at that point. And I thought, if I start the person with 6,000 emails, they will get drowned in the volume. So I spent the weekend before she started, organising my inbox, and I went through and I filed 6,000 emails. In doing so, I learned something I didn't know before. I started to see certain conversations, so I would filter by person. And I went, this person, I've been going to and fro a lot, but I sort of lost track of how much. I went to and fro with this person over 20 times, and we never did any paid work. Okay, I hadn't seen that. And there were lots of people like that. So in the process of just getting organized, I suddenly realized how unproductive I was being and how much I was wasting time with people because I wasn't identifying who was worth spending time with in progressing them forward. So I got organized. I brought a virtual assistant on, and they were doing 10 hours a month and doing basic scheduling. That was all it was. I can't tell you how much of an impact it is when you have the same experience now. When somebody else does just the to and fro, or I was available, this time has changed, can we get a new time? It enabled me to have twice as many conversations because I wasn't spending time scheduling. So I went from having 50, 55 live conversations to having 100 because nice. I would go, I'll have the conversation. Shall we follow up? My EA will be in touch. And then I could copy them in and I could almost forget about it. So long as it was captured on the tracker, and my EA and I will sit down once a fortnight. We'll just go through the tracker and go, yes, 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 here's an update, yes, yes, yes. That's fine. It's the best investment I've ever made. And now I have an EA still only working 15 hours a month probably with me. That's all. So not hugely expensive, brilliant value. And I've been doing that now for, I think, coming up for 3 years, and it's underpinned that growth actually.
And you're saying know your numbers.
Yeah.
Because I heard a real fundamental in that, which was when you sorted out your emails, you could see that you'd had 22s and fro's.
Exactly. That's really important because one of my very senior coaching clients says something like, if it's the third date and you haven't got together yet, then it's not happening. Something like that. And I think that one of the hardest things when you're trying to build a business is say no. One of the most important things that you do when you're trying to build a business is say no. It's really important. My EA was talking to me actually. She's called Fran. She's brilliant, and she was working with somebody where it wasn't enjoyable, but it was lucrative, and she let it go. And she said, "What do I need to do to fill the gap?" And I said, "Keep doing great work." And about 2 weeks later, I was talking to somebody, and they said, "Oh, I'm getting a bit overwhelmed." And I went, "Oh, talk to my EA. She's got capacity." He signed up a week later, and within another week, he'd sent her another client. So there is this thing. If you do good work with the right people, you can worry less about struggling, where am I going to find the next client? Because good work, people talk about it. People refer you. Some of my longest standing coaching clients regularly point people in my direction. And I have a little referral fee. So I go, if you refer me a coach and I start doing work with them, then I'll pay you an amount to say thank you very much. And it's just all those little things you start to do. They are the right thing to do. And, I'm not doing it because it's on a spreadsheet, but at the same time, it's intentional, because it doesn't happen by accident. And if you sit staring at the phone or staring at the email and expecting that someone's going to contact you with opportunities, the risk is you run out of cash before the opportunities come in. So you do have to get out there a bit.
To the right
places. You do have to ask people. Yeah.
I like talking about funeral directors because most people aren't coaching funeral directors. But if you are, funeral directors is where you are and where the answer to the question is you.
Right.
We need to be where funeral directors are.
Right. And, when you think about the conversations you're having, even if you're not yet converting into sales, have the conversations, and do have coaching-like conversations. because it's a really powerful thing to drop into a conversation in a really authentic way. That's interesting, because I was talking to somebody else last week about becoming a leader for the first time, and they talked about this thing. And the person listening to you hears that you're in the conversation, hears that you're working with people, hears you talking authentically and confidently and interestingly about the topic. So, again, that thing about talking about you and what you offer, if you say, let me tell you about me as a coach, let me tell you about I do Gestalt coaching or whatever. Interesting, true, sort of, but not a good way of building relationships. When you go, I had this amazing conversation last week, and you never talk about anything that's specific. It's not, you don't breach people's confidentiality, but you can say, I was working with this brilliant young person who's being touted for a senior leadership role in the next couple of years, and they were saying that it's about building their communication skills, and actually for me, I think it's about building confidence. And then the person you're talking to goes, yeah, actually I think confidence is a thing, isn't it? And immediately then you're in a conversation. So there's just a way of finding a way to tell stories, and less stories about you, more stories about the conversations you're in. Be in the conversation. I interviewed Marshall Goldsmith on my podcast, who in many rankings is ranked sort of the world's #1 executive coach. Normally on my podcast, people tell me a lot about their personal story. He told me virtually nothing of his. And I thought that's really interesting. And I was fascinated, because I actually don't know much about his personal story. And he just wasn't going there, because for him, it isn't about that. It isn't about his personal story and what he brings. And I thought there was something really interesting to take away from that, actually.
Fascinating. So, Gary, I've built 3D coaching significantly on single session coaching, although lots of the work that we do is coaching over time. And single session coaching breeds single session coaching, because people go, oh, I work with these coaches, and you should have a conversation with them. How do you get people to move from one to many?
Only when they want to, only when they need to. Yeah. You and I are going to agree on that. If you want people to have multiple sessions of coaching, you need to make it really clear that they don't need to do that, because they don't. Because if it's right for them to have one session, then you'll do that. I talk to people about paying for coaching, and I say, even if you want to have multiple sessions, some people pay in a block, and they'll pay for 2 or 3 or 4 sessions of coaching, or they'll pay for one at a time, whatever suits you. Then people don't feel they're being sold to, because they're not, because you're not trying to sell to them. But there's a value that comes from a coaching journey that is different from and additive to what you get in a single session of coaching. I've done a lot of single sessions, and maybe I've got, over the years, 25, 30 clients, something like that, who would have had 6+ sessions of coaching. The coaching client that I've done most sessions with, we probably had 65 sessions of coaching over the years. And again, I let go of the idea of the frequency of them. So sometimes averagely it's probably once a month. But for some of my coaching clients now, it's once a quarter, once a year, whenever it's needed. But typically it starts about once a month. The key thing I've learned, if your strategic objective is to build people going from one session to multiple, is they've got to feel in session 1, and ideally in the chemistry session, they've got to feel the value of coaching. So they've got to have one little moment somewhere in there that told them a thing they didn't know before. That they went, oh, yeah, I understand something. I see myself in it. Doesn't mean I've got all the answers, but I get something from this that's different from other conversations I have with other people. This isn't the only way of doing it, but a way it worked for me in the early days was I'd always been fascinated by strengths and the Gallup-Clifton Strengths Assessment. 15 years ago, a coach took me through my strengths assessment, and I found it fascinating. And over the years, with people in my teams, people we taught as when we were professional dance coaches, we got them to do their strengths because it helped them to understand why they argued, or helped them to understand how they work really well together. And so it was very natural for me when I started my coaching training at some point to go, yeah, it would be good to understand more about this. So I trained with Gallup-Clifton Strengths. But you could train with any of many psychometrics. I like that one. Often, the first session that I had with people was talking in part about their strengths profile. And that served as something that made them go, I know a thing I didn't know before. That wasn't really a coaching conversation, but it was just giving them something they didn't know before. And then they would go, oh, I'm starting to see things a bit differently. I'm starting to see some of the things that I thought were my weaknesses, but really they're my strengths. I just don't know how to play them. We should talk about this some more. So for me, the psychometric was one way of having that kind of impactful first session. As a more experienced coach now, I often have a first session that doesn't talk about a psychometric. But I think in those early days, I certainly talked to a lot of coaches, still talk to a lot of coaches who go, we had a session. I'm not sure they were quite clear by the end of that first session, really what coaching is. I'm not quite sure whether they thought it was valuable, and they're not quite sure whether they're going to come back. And so the thing that you've got to balance, because the conversation has got to be right for the person. And I would always say that you're there for them, for their needs. And sometimes the conversation just doesn't unlock the thing, and that's okay. But I sometimes say to people, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I do say, I think that coaching, when it's really working, is impactful quite quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that you know that it's different quite quickly. It doesn't mean you got all the answers. It doesn't mean you figured everything out quickly. But I said, I think you should know after one session, possibly two, that this is different and this is something or not. And if you don't feel that, we should have a conversation about whether this is right for you, whether I'm the right coach for you, and all of that. Is it coaching? Is it now? Is it me? Those things. Early on, I remember meeting a coaching client, and I said, have you had coaching before? And they said, yeah, I have. I had 12 sessions of coaching, and I'm just not sure I got anything out of it. And I went, someone sold you those 12 sessions of coaching, and you bought them. And neither of you, at any point in the 12 sessions until the end, went, not sure this is doing anything. And I remember at that point going, I never want to be in that place. I never want to be the client turning around and saying, and I use the term client here as a shorthand really, but I don't want them turning around and going, I invested a lot of my money, a lot of my time in this thing, and I'm not sure it was worthwhile. Let's have that conversation after one session, or possibly two. I also, some coaching relationships naturally come to an end, and they sort of don't. It's sort of like when coaching's really good, you're always there. You're just not having coaching sessions right now. Yeah. So again, I don't think about what's a program of coaching. People say to me all the time, how many sessions is normal? I go, it's whatever you need.
Right? Absolutely.
It could be 20 minutes. It could be an hour. It could be, once a fortnight for a year, but only if that's helpful. And I always feel like no more than 3 months ahead. I don't want to go, let's plan out the rest of the year, because who knows what's going to happen. Let's figure out where you want to be in, we're sitting here in May. Let's figure out where you want to be by the time you go on summer holiday. Yeah. And then let's discuss there whether that's enough or whether you want to do more. The more you try not to sell more, actually, averagely, the more people will go, yeah, I like working with you, because no one's trying to sell anything here. It's free. Nice. It's freeing.
And because we don't know how much, how many, how often until we start working with somebody.
Right.
But I think the thing that you really emphasised there was that this is about doing some work, and it's about getting to the heart of something and unlocking something.
Right.
And it might be a massive unlock, or it might be a little unlock, but there is a tangible something. And actually, I want listeners who aren't coaches to hear that. If it's just a conversation, you don't need to keep going. If you want something else, like work.
And I'm going to say something else that some people might react to, but I'm going to say it anyway, because like with everything I'm saying, I'm saying this is my opinion. There is a bit of coaching that can be positively, and I use this word cautiously, a little bit performative.
Yeah.
If I ask questions, that's fine. It's fine. If I ask the same questions in a slightly aware manner, by which I mean I'm aware of what the question is, I'm aware of the tone of voice I'm using when I'm saying it, I'm aware of the pace at which I'm speaking, I'm aware of the silence that I'm leaving, that same question can have a deeper resonance. Now, you have to be really careful about that you're not leading or you're not manufacturing. But at the same time, when you say you have your little sounds that you make, which are incredibly powerful, and they're very deliberate. I know that you know, and you've shaped them with experience over time. I have a drop in tone, and
sorry, that was my noise.
Right. So I talk to people about breathing, and I say, you know, if I'm working with people on public speaking, I say when we breathe a little bit in and out all the time. That's our normal respiratory breathing. We can breathe a little bit in and out with a full lung, or we can breathe a little bit in and out with an empty lung. With a full lung, it sounds high and a bit nervous, and it makes the other person a bit nervous. If we breathe out and then speak with the same little in and out, your voice drops back an octave, and it has greater gravitas. If I put the microphone further away, I sound like I'm on a Zoom call. If I come right into the microphone and say, "And now what do you know?" I sound like I'm Jazz FM late at night. And I'm really aware of, you know, sometimes when you want to help somebody notice a thing they just noticed, you go, "And what was that?"
Yes.
And then you shut up. And you hold the shut upness for really quite a long time until you feel a bit uncomfortable and they feel really uncomfortable. And then they'll go, "I've never thought about that before." And then you go, "Mm-hmm." You know, so there's a bit like, and that performance, and it is I call it performance. I mean, it's deliberate. I talk about, you know, this thing about you have verbal language and non-verbal language. So verbal language are the words, non-verbal language the body language, whether you're sitting down, standing up. The paraverbal language, how you said what you said, with what tone, with what pace, with what intonation, with what accent, with what silence. That's the paraverbal language. I would say that's the most powerful tool that I'm continuously developing. And actually podcasting helps because it makes me listen to myself a lot, and it makes me notice the way I asked a question or the way I created a space that generated some new thinking in the person I was talking to. And that's the kind of little thing that if you have a moment of that in a coaching conversation, people want more of it because it takes them to a different place.
Yeah, because it's not what they experience in many other conversations in their world.
Right.
One of the developments I notice for coaches a lot, when I listen to recordings, often I notice that the coach has got the timing right. So they're making interventions in really useful places, but the intervention isn't as useful as it could be.
Right.
And a lot of that is about sound.
Yeah.
And space. And silence. And all sorts. Fascinating. So This is a bumper episode, lovely people. You could press pause now and come back to the rest later. But this is so worth it, and really grateful, Gary, for your generosity in sharing the truth and the numbers. How do you get people to recommend you?
You've got to start with doing good work.
Yeah.
And good work means not necessarily they've solved all their problems, but they've found it a powerful thing. There was a good investment of time or money for a period of time. And you could get a recommendation from somebody who's had one session with you, and I have. Or you can get, the really powerful recommendations are from people who say, I've been working with Gary for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Now, that's not every month for 3 years, but and we still work together. And it's sort of, we've gone on a journey together that as they progressed in their, in this case, career, that, coaching is still useful. And it shows something about sort of the evolution of it. The people you're working with need to know that you're building a business.
Yeah.
So they're not going to recommend you if they think that you don't have any capacity or you're not interested in taking on new clients. But you don't want to say to them, I haven't got any clients, because that sounds like you're not very good. Very early in my coaching, I was talking to somebody new to coaching, in coaching training, but really senior and experienced in a people-related area, who was naturally just going to be a brilliant coach because of their 20, 30 years experience. And they said, I can't get anybody to sign up for coaching with me. And I said, how are you describing yourself? And he said, I'm early in my coaching journey. I'm doing some training. I've got loads of capacity. I'd really like to work with some people, and it's free. Do you want to work with me? And he said, no one's taking it up, but it's free. And I said, well, it sounds too cheap. It sounds not good enough. And I said, if you say, I've been working in the space for a long time. I am now adding coaching skills. I have got a little bit of capacity to work with a couple of people over the next 3 months. And I'll offer you a really reasonable rate because it's part of my training, so it helps me too. But, you're getting value from it, so I'd like you to contribute something. And he went, well, that sounds really different. And I said, it's the same time and it's the same coaching. So when I'm talking to people, I say to them, if I'm in a place where I'm trying to take on more clients, I say, if you know anybody who is in this very specific place, so again, I come back to who is your customer. I don't go anybody for coaching because then it sounds a bit desperate and it sounds like you're not good enough. You can't find coaching clients. But when you say, how you were in that place where, if there's anyone else who's like that, where you think they would find something like this or a bit of this useful, I'd be really happy to have a chat with them for free. And then, and if that's helpful, that's great. And if they'd like to spend more time, then we can talk about it. Then you're just indicating to them referrals would be really helpful. Testimonials, softly. Limited time, so sometimes, in my early days, I would have a day that was completely free. And I would say, I've got availability at 2:00 or 4:00. I wouldn't say I've got availability anytime between 9 and 7, even though I did.
Yeah.
Because again, you think about, well, what message are you conveying? You need to convey a message of being, good at what you do, low ego. It's not about being, I'm amazing or I'm super expensive. But you go, I work with people. I talk about this stuff when I'm not working in coaching. It'll be interesting. It'll definitely be interesting. It might even be helpful. And there's a value against it. I think about that.
So
Testimonials
be
are
normal.
also... Yeah, be normal.
So testimonials?
Testimonials are really important and helpful. You need to ask people for testimonials. Ask people where they've genuinely had an impact. People, it's quite difficult to write a testimonial from scratch and to know really what they want. So if you write an email to the person, you say, I'm building up my website, or I'd like to share 2 or 3 stories on LinkedIn so that people who were struggling in a place that you were struggling could also see that this could be beneficial. Here's an example of a testimonial somebody else wrote for length and style, a couple of sentences. Or I wondered whether you might be able to say something about this. Here's some language. Feel free to use a bit of that or come up with your own thing. And often they come back and go, yeah, I liked what you put, with a few tweaks. And it makes it really easy for them to do. Ideally, you want your testimonial to be named. That makes it much more powerful. When you say, I have a testimonial from one of my early coaching clients who's a senior leader at ASOS. And because it's quite easy to say a person who did coaching with me once said I was amazing, there's no value in that testimony. When you say this person who founded a cake business said I was really helpful when they were building their team for the first time and building that culture of leadership, amazing. Really simple. So try and get the name testimonial. When you get a testimonial, you could send them a little form and you could say, please tell me how you're happy for me to share the testimonial. Only in private with other people that I'm thinking about coaching. On my website, but without your name. On my website, but with your name. Because as soon as you put your name, their name, then they're going to be Googleable. So it's really bad form if they Google their name and they find themselves out there saying, I was really struggling at work and then Gary solved my leadership. But you'll be surprised how many people are happy to share their name if you ask and if you make it their choice to do it. The most powerful testimonial is actually the one that's just shared in private. It doesn't have to be on your website, on LinkedIn. And the other thing that you can ask them is, would you be happy if I had somebody thinking about doing coaching with me to have a call with you to ask about what the experience was like, the good and the bad? Oh, yeah, I'd be really happy to do that. I've probably done that 3 or 4 times. I've had quite a senior coaching client. They've said, could I talk to somebody that you've worked with before? Very happy, and I know who those people are. And I have a little spreadsheet with that listed.
Of course you do.
So you make sure that if they've offered it to you, you keep it tracked, because it's so valuable and people want to know it.
Yeah. Do you pay for marketing?
I have sometimes, and it's never generated a return. So I don't now. I don't and I do. So that's a complicated answer. When I published my book, The Idea Mindset, I thought it was a hybrid self-published book, which meant I wrote it. I paid for an editor to help edit it. I paid through a company to get it printed. And then they handled all the actual printing in Amazon and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a HarperCollins publisher giving me some advance or something like that. I didn't know like whether it was going to be successful or not successful, whether it was going to go viral. I didn't know. I thought I probably should spend some money on marketing, but I didn't know whether it was going to make a return. I spent quite a reasonable sum on marketing. And then when I did the analysis afterwards, I found that it was costing me £20 in marketing spend for every book that I sold. And I was making in return £1 for every book that I sold in the margin that would come to me. So I was paying 20 to make back 1. So I was losing £19 every time I sold a book. So I stopped doing that. I had a period of time where I was working with a social media marketer, because in my world, I'm choosing, people don't have to, but I'm choosing to do some work around building a personal brand because I like to. It's not critical to building the coaching business, but I like to do it. And I had a trial period where we tried to do some quite focused work on, building consistent posting and those kinds of things. When I looked at the data, the reality was nothing really changed. So the thing about marketing is it's worth it if you get a sudden viral response. and you would say, oh, because I did marketing, then that post suddenly took off and got 1 million views, and suddenly I'm Stephen Bartlett. Possible for that to happen without active marketing. But in reality, most online marketing won't help coaches. The pay per 1,000 views is much more expensive than on LinkedIn than on the other platforms. And in reality, for many executive coaches, depends on where your coaching client base is, most of your clients are going to come through LinkedIn. So actually, I would say that virtually none of my revenue has come through paid marketing. Has paying for marketing helped? Like I said before, paying over the course of 2 years around about £5,000 to be a member of that Forbes Coaches Council, I think is a pivotal thing. And if I knew what I knew now going back, I would pay for that again.
Yeah.
I would pay for the Gallup training because that took me from one session to multiple sessions. There's other ways of doing it, but that I would do that again for that reason, as well as the fact that I think Gallup is really good. Knowing what I do now, would I have spent as much money as I did on book marketing? I wouldn't have spent any of it because it didn't return. Would I have spent money on social media marketing with a professional marketer? No, but I needed to try it to know that was the case. Otherwise, I'd just be sitting there going, I wonder whether. What I do now is my EA, who's brilliant and multi-talented, helps me with some of my posting. So she will help create some ideas and I will edit them, and we work together in that way. What I have done, which you can now do with ChatGPT, is I created a little version of ChatGPT trained on some of the things that I think. So I went, I'm going to write on a piece of paper something around my philosophy in coaching, my view on how people can develop as leaders, some things that I think are really important. And then I'll get ChatGPT to be trained on that. You can do that with ChatGPT Plus for $20 a month. And I get my team to create content ideas using that. So it is trained on me. So it's not like it's the universe writing this post. It's actually a version of me writing the post. But there's ways to do that now that, don't require you spending huge amounts of money at all. Where I do invest is... Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, one of my philosophies ever since I started my business in the 1990s was never to spend money that wasn't being generated from the business. So never to spend. So when I started 3D coaching, I think I put £100 in the bank,
right?
Because you had to have some money to open it. But ever since then, I have made a deliberate decision not to spend any of my own money on training or marketing or anything. So it might be, in those early days, it might mean that I didn't earn anything, but I also didn't spend anything because I was reinvesting the money that I was earning back into the other thing. But you learn, don't you? Because I've learned so many things. In the days of glossy leaflets, we did a glossy leaflet thing for a big conference. That was a complete waste of money. Most of the money I've spent on marketing hasn't delivered what the hope had been. Although we are going to get a book publicist for the next book, but that's because the audience for the next book isn't just coaches, it's people, and therefore it's worth the book publicist to try and get into some of the newspapers.
So here's the thing about investing in stuff to build your profile in your business, if that's your route. Rarely does the revenue come back from the thing that you invested the marketing in, but it's associated. So I committed to talking numbers, so I talk numbers. The total investment end to end that I made to put the idea mindset out as a published book, including editing, printing, recording an audiobook, cover design, internal design, marketing, PR, was £50,000.
Wow.
In book sales, ever, I have made back 1% of that amount. it paid back as a project within 2 months of me publishing the book. Why? Because when I was writing the book and publishing the book, I posted about it on LinkedIn. And everybody was fascinated in going on the journey with Gary about, now I've written my book, now I've done my first draft, now I'm thinking about cover designs, what do you think? Which one do you like? And so it wasn't that loads of people bought the book. Some people bought the book. But people thought of me as in coaching. And I signed up coaching relationships and some corporate coaching relationships based on profile and awareness that came from I had a book to talk about. I was talking to an author recently who has just made, I think he's made the Wall Street Journal top 10, something like that. His marketing investment in the book he's just published, which is a business book, was $250,000. There's somebody else that's come on the podcast who, every time they publish a book, they receive an advance of $1 million for the book. They're a very high-profile coach, and they invest $1 million in marketing. Why do they do that? Because having that book that's very, very successful gets them speaking engagements.
Yeah.
Their speaking fee in the US could easily be $50,000 to $100,000 for a keynote. So you're not thinking about, I'm going to make it back in the book sales. So you have to see yourself, if you're building that kind of business, a portfolio business, you have to think of it as a system. You don't sell coaching just by talking to people about coaching. You sell coaching also because you have a point of view. People are interested in your point of view. You win an award. You publish a book. Not because people are going to read it in large volumes. If they do, that's wonderful. But it just tells people that you're serious about what you're doing. It tells people something about what's important to you, whether they're aligned with what's important to you. So you have to be thinking about and building this platform if that's the kind of business you want to build. There's a completely counter way of building this business where you go, I am a very exclusive, very high value coach in a very discreet way. I have no public profile at all. I don't post out there. You wouldn't know who my clients were, but they're very important people. If you want to come and work with me, it's very expensive, and I don't take on many people. You'll be able to charge a lot for coaching if you then going to be good. But you could have a high profile way of doing it. You could have a no profile way of doing it. Interestingly, in the advisory world, people think about companies like McKinsey are the most expensive consulting firm to work with. They're not. There's another firm out there that is a multiple more expensive than them, and you will never have heard of them. And they position themselves as, if anybody else could solve your problem, use them because they'll be cheaper. At the point they come back to you and they say, we can't solve it, come to us because we probably can.
Interesting. So as we begin to wrap up, Gary, a lot of what we've talked about today is about high net worth, high value coaching businesses. So what do you want to say to listeners who don't want to do high value coaching because their view is about accessibility and democratization of coaching and enabling lots of people to get coaching?
I think you heard a different thing from what I was actually saying. So when I describe a high value coaching business, what I mean is I am doing averagely a low number of coaching hours. 2 to 3 hours a week on average. Some months I might do 1 hour of coaching. Over the course of the year, the average coaching rate is such that it's a good business. Some of the people I'm working with are senior or high net worth or ultra high net worth and paying a high rate. And over time, more people in that category. Over time, no fewer in the category of people that don't have a lot of money or don't pay for coaching at all. So my philosophy has always been that my goal is to broaden access to coaching. It's why I do the podcast. It's why I wrote the book. It's why I like to do this kind of thing, which is like, it shouldn't, this information, and in my perspective, shouldn't be behind a paywall.
Yeah.
It should just be available to people. So I have this thing, a sliding scale for coaching, and I did write an article in Forbes when I was a member, called something like "How much should you charge for coaching?" And I described.
And I'm going to put that in the show notes, Gary.
Right. So what I described in there is a sliding scale. So my view is that coaching has a value, and the value is different depending on who you are. Now, there's a really important distinction. Coaching has a value to everybody that's significant in a human value, in a personal value, in an awareness value, whatever. I'm talking about business building. So I'm saying if you are the CEO of an organization and you improve your performance by 5%, it improves your revenue, improves your cost base, and improves your leadership of 100 other people. So it's really valuable to the organization. They will pay a lot of money for that. The leader might get a pay rise, might get a promotion, might get a bigger next role. So they will personally pay a lot of money for that.
Mm-hmm.
If they are a junior person in the organization isn't going to value investment in them so highly. They might be somebody who deserves coaching, will benefit from coaching, cannot afford it. So I've always said that I think coaching should be on a sliding scale according to value / ability to pay. And I've always believed that I should be doing pro bono work. So my aim in my mind is that 10 to 20% of the time I'm spending coaching should be for free at any one time. Is it exactly that? It goes up and down a bit, but I always have 2 or 3 people that I'm working with on a pro bono basis, and I think that's really important. Marshall Goldsmith has this pay it forward thing. So his philosophy is, how can I help the next generation to learn from what I've learned over the years? But the people that he works with, he says, well, I'm only offering it to you in the commitment from you that you will do the same if you get to where I've got to. The sliding scale is a difference in price of a factor of something like 7. So the people paying the most are paying something like 7 times the people that are paying the least. So you'll see in the article that Claire's going to put a link to the exact numbers, but I will tell you, in the spirit of openness and sharing the numbers, last year what my sliding scale was. So I have 2 sides to it. One is if the company's paying. So if the company's paying and you're a senior leader and you're paid all in over £200,000 a year. So typically a C-suite leader or a director in a big company, I would have been charging £1,000 an hour for that session. Some people would charge more. Some people will charge a lot more. Some people will charge less. And I charged 1,000. If you're the next level down and you are being paid between 100 and 200,000, I'd be charging 720. If you were a level below that and being paid between 60 and 100, I'd be charging 430. If you're the level below that and you were under 60k a year, but somebody was still wanting to invest in you and coaching, then I'd be charging 300. And if you were any role in a charity arts organization and I wasn't pro bono, then I'd be charging 300, including if you were the CEO. And some of those people I would go, no, this is a pro bono situation. So I make a judgment call, but that's basically where my tiers are. And often, actually, the most senior people will go, well, I want to pay less. And I would say, but other people who don't earn what you're earning are paying that rate. And so it wouldn't really be fair to them to have you at that rate too, because other people earn less than you are paying more. So that's the rate if the company's paying. And then I would take about 1/3 off that if they're paying for themselves. Because if the CEO is earning 200,000 a year and taking home, whatever, 10,000 a month or more, then they can afford £650 an hour for coaching, and they will pay that.
Yeah.
Not for, 20 sessions through the year, but a session. And then, maybe we should have a couple more of those. Why? Because it unlocks something for them. And when you are coaching at that higher level, in reality, people are perfectly used to paying that rate. In the US, the coaching rates at the highest level are a multiple higher. So if you're a C-suite executive in a Fortune 100 company, your firm may well be investing $5, $10, $15, $20,000 a month in your coaching relationship. So sometimes, and I say this, again, I share the numbers because I'm talking to coaches all the time, Claire, I'm sure you are too, who will go, I really worry that £230 is a bit high for the CEO. And I'm going, that's why they're not taking you seriously and you're not getting the work. Because the fact that you quoted that number suggests that you're not as good as the person that charged 1,000. Over time, I've charged higher rates, as I built my business. And there's data that says that the higher the rate, the longer the coaching relationship lasts, which is fascinating.
So interesting.
People value the coaching a little bit based on how much they paid for it, as well as their actual experience of coaching. So yeah, I think sliding scales are really important, personally.
So, Gary, thank you so much for being so open about your numbers. I know that some of our listeners are on fire in a good way from having some good data to help them work things out. And there's somebody listening who says, I'm not making enough money from coaching. Should I quit and go and get myself a day job?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to say to this person?
The beauty of coaching is we're all going to continue coaching for the rest of our lives, not even till we retire. It's a beautiful thing that you can keep doing a bit with the people you've worked with for a long time, for as long as you want to. So it can feel like a race to build my business in 3 years. If it's taken me 4 years, that's slow. It's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I look at my total coaching experience and I compare, Claire, with your total coaching experience. And I am a little bit overwhelmed by what it feels like to have, 10 to 20,000 hours of coaching experience. You built it over a long period of time, not because you rushed at the highest number you could get, but because you've built it over time. And so in actual fact, I think the question is, what do I have to be doing to be able to pay the bills and be comfortable and continue coaching? The amount that I can, the amount that I want to. And I think if you let go of, I have to achieve a certain number from coaching, you're more likely to actually build a sustainable business that's right for you. And I'll say again, I'm sharing my own personal experience. It's one way of doing it. And everybody else's experience will be different from mine, but it is aimed to break down some of the nobody talks about it, and there's all of this sort of rumor and counter rumor kind of flying around. I just say, find the people that you love working with and work with them, and if that's a session a month, it's great, and they might refer you to somebody. One of my most valued coaching relationships today, I work with somebody on a monthly basis. She's in Bolivia. When we first met, we had a couple of conversations and then it sort of went cold. And I thought, oh, that would have been really interesting, because she's a very interesting person with very interesting sort of things she wanted to work through. And she came back 2.5 years later and she said, now's the right time. I always remember our conversation. It was really effective. It was really interesting, really powerful, but it wasn't the right time. Now's the right time. And that was probably 2 years ago. And we've worked together every month. And she's a high value client. It's just about waiting until they're ready and not trying to force it, not trying to push it.
And if you need the money from that person to pay your shopping, your food shopping,
go get a job.
Then you probably need to be getting a job and doing a little bit of coaching on the side.
Right. And the beauty of something that averagely is a higher value coaching business is you can do that. My non-coaching job right now is 4 days a week. And that works okay. Would I love to be in a place where I was just doing coaching? Yeah. Would I currently be doing more than 2.5 hours a week of coaching if I was only doing coaching? I don't know. I wouldn't be doing 10. And that's okay.
Thank you, Gary.
That was a lot.
For coming to the Coaching In for an hour and a half. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And I'm sure you've got questions and all sorts of things. So I'll pop Gary's something in the show notes so that you can contact the bit of him that he'd like to be contacted by.
And thank you, Claire, for hosting as ever. This is it's a brilliant podcast, and you have so many amazing guests. And I think that the best way to build your business is to just hear people's stories and learn from them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll see you on the hills for an in real life walk, Gary.
See you soon.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Gary, for coming. Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we'd love you to share the podcast with a friend or leave a comment on social media. And if you'd like to become a regular at the Coaching In, you can subscribe on Podbean and all major podcast channels. We look forward to welcoming you next time. You've been listening to The Coaching In, 3D Coaching's virtual pub. For more information, check out 3dcoaching.com.